Hello, I'm Susan Elliott, the News and Special Reports Editor for Musical America. Today we're going to be speaking to Afa Dworkin. Afa is the President and Artistic Director of the Sphinx Organization, which is based in Detroit and is coming up on its 25th anniversary. One of the things that Omicron has managed to do is to change Sphinx's annual conference from a live event in Detroit to an online event. The last time I spoke with Afa was in July of 2020, in the midst of the pandemic. And I thought in speaking with her again, we could discuss any of the changes that have been made among arts organizations, increasing in their diversity. Hi, Afa. It's good to see you again.
Great to see you. Great to be with you.
So the last time we talked was in July of 2020.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because when I first thought about talking to you again, I thought, oh, goody, we can talk about before and after the pandemic. It's the first time we talked, we were in the throes of it.
Mm-hmm.
No, nobody knows anything. What's going on in Detroit? Are the schools reopening and all that sort of thing, or do you know yet?
It's a mixed bag in Detroit, and I think similar to much of the rest of the country. I think, several months ago, things were looking up. I think we all were much more hopeful. Schools did reopen in Detroit at the top of the academic year. So we actually went back to in-person instruction in September. And in fact, our touring ensemble, the Sphinx Virtuosi, embarked on their 10-city tour, and it culminated at Carnegie Hall in mid-October. So things are back to that vibrancy and live performances, live instruction. So we're really excited about everything. And then on the eve of the anniversary, Sphinx's 25th anniversary is coming up in January. About 2 weeks ago, we've made a decision to shift to the virtual space once again, unfortunately, with both the Sphinx competition, which is its 25th edition, is happening in January, as well as the global convening that we typically hold in Detroit. We've essentially shifted gears because the numbers, it seemed, with the newest variant were concerning. They're certainly concerning in the state of Michigan, here in Detroit, but they're also concerning in all around the country. And our largest artist contingent is New York based. So we had to kind of look out for everyone and think about safety and really well-being of the community. So we chose to shift back, and we will proceed, but we'll proceed without live performing until further notice.
When we last spoke, one of the things I want to come back to is at the end of our interview, I asked you what you would say to arts organizations around the country in a way that would give them guidance on how to become more diverse, and especially with Black and Latinx people. So how are we doing? Let's see, I wrote down 10% of the budget towards Black and Latinx support, including commissioning, programming, recruitment. How's everybody doing?
A complicated question, but also an important one to ask. So, of course, so much has happened since we spoke last, right? The pandemic sort of turned the field in the world upside down and inside out. And in some ways, I think it forced us all to innovate. And of course, the other aspect of everything that's happened since then is that I think the world and our industry responded, for better or worse, responded to a lot of the social challenges and the racial injustices that have been happening. in this country. So I have to say that overall, in an aggregate, I'm certainly very hopeful, because I have seen some sincere measures taken by large and small organizations in the right direction. By way of diversifying repertoire, certainly I've seen some exciting things relative to programming, and certainly engagement, and some profoundly important things happening all throughout the sector. However, relative to kind of facts and systemic change and some of the things that I shared at the time, I think I stand by it, and that my ultimate sentiment is that we still got a ways to go, not only by way of large demonstrative, sometimes performative gestures that may have some reflection in the press, but really in terms of systemic sustained change. I haven't seen any large or small organization visibly make a statement and stick to any sort of specific SMART goals, for example, the budget percentage allocation, or really a long range commitment relative to representation by way of artist engagement, repertoire, searches, etc. However, in action, we've seen some really interesting things. Of course, orchestras have come out with exciting repertoire announcements. We've seen more music by Black and Brown composers. Sphinx itself now has about 108 orchestral partners, compared to probably when we last spoke about 70. So that's exciting. And I've seen some music schools and conservatories certainly come up with interesting ideas, which are collaborative in nature and are looking at systemic shifts. So I think we're moving in the right direction. What I want to see all of us do is sustain that effort, and really not be afraid to really name our goals and stick to them and hold one another accountable for those goals.
It's so interesting because I was just going to ask you about orchestras and these various fellowships and that they are instituting for minority musicians. And how many of those musicians that they are recruiting are coming through Sphinx?
I would say, first, I think I want to acknowledge that the orchestral world has moved, I would say, beyond the concept of fellowships, which is probably a good thing, in that while the sentiment and the spirit behind fellowships was laudable, and certainly positive in that orchestras were looking for ways to include and empower and nurture the abundant talent that certainly exists within the Black and Brown communities. I think ultimately fellowships in and of themselves did not necessarily result in systemic change and demonstrative placement statistics. So what I do want to remark on is that orchestras have recognized that. And as of several years ago, they've certainly partnered up not only just with Sphinx, but with one another, go beyond fellowships and really participate in empowering individual Black and Brown musicians by way of contributing to the audition fund that Sphinx administers through its National Alliance for Audition Support, but also partner up in creating bridges and connections between their permanent musicians and these emerging up and coming musicians who are on the audition circuit. So I think there's been industry-wide recognition that fellowships alone aren't enough, and potentially in their construct are insufficient and maybe potentially incomplete and maybe not so helpful in today's world. Today, I think it's just being approached through a multidimensional kind of a lens where we're looking at the entirety of the database that Sphinx has been building over the years in partnership with our orchestras who partner with Sphinx, but also with the League of American Orchestras and New World Symphony, who are kind of the consortium partners. And I think this national database is certainly being grown and fortified. And as that happens, it becomes easier then for orchestras with their openings to tap into this kind of very poised pipeline. Musicians who are prepared and ready to go and certainly excited about the prospect of joining the ranks of these orchestras. So I'm certainly hopeful about this most recent approach, which is also informed by a set of new suggested guidelines and best practices that relate not just to audition, but also tenure and promotion. So I've seen the orchestral world largely embrace these ideas of kind of looking beyond tradition and looking for results. And
Right.
certainly am encouraged by some of the early progress we've been making together.
How much do you think these individuals who have either already been with the orchestra in an administrative position or are brought into the orchestra, whose goal or whose job it is specifically to up the diversity ratio in their organization? I worry that some of that is just tokenism. But, gee, look at this. We have a VP and he's a person of color and therefore everything's going to be fine. So can you talk to that a little bit about what you think about that?
I think it's a terrific question. My own opinion on that is, and this is opinion based on lived experience in the last quarter of a century of my life being devoted to this work and inclusion and diversity. And I strongly believe that this is the job of every single person on any given team. I think it's terrific that we've been able to establish positions of seniority, whose job is really to kind of lead the charge of diversifying and including and ensuring the equity piece. I think that's great, but that's not enough. It's really a bottom-up and top-down kind of an approach. And I think that is the only way we're going to overcome centuries and decades of both systemic, intentional, and implicit exclusion. And I think that's the only way we sort of stand a chance to see any demonstrable change in our lifetime. It's not enough for a VP for inclusion, diversity, and belonging to push the charge. It's not enough for artistic administrators to program a certain way. It is not enough for the HR directors to revise the way in which they look at talent pool. It's also not sufficient for the CEO to be the champion for diversity, nor just entrusting the entirety of that job with, say, the executive committee or leadership of the board. It is everybody and kind of an approach. On the Sphinx end, to try and support our colleagues across the country in orchestras and academic institutions and really across the board, 3 years ago, we launched our own executive leadership program called Sphinx Lead. So we're now seeing the fourth generation of these C-suite in the making kind of emerging leaders of Black and Latinx background who come through the ranks and participate in this program, all of whom, without any exception, are poised, prepared, well-positioned to succeed when and if they join the ranks in these senior positions of any orchestra or any conservatory or music school. So what I can say is that there's definitely not any sort of lack of talent.
And are these coming through applications from individuals?
It's a competitive process. It includes an application that's written, application that's several rounds of video interviews and another final interview, a reference process as well. So it's a highly competitive process.
Can you share some examples of some of the results of the LEAD program?
Absolutely. Just even off the top of my head, we have anything from a recent placement as a CEO of the Chicago Philharmonic a year and a half ago. One of the placements was actually with a member of cohort number 2, somebody who's now a CEO of Chicago Sinfonietta, a senior position in innovation and leadership at Colburn School of Music, and that's somebody who was also named. I mean, there's somebody who just took a position less than 6 months ago, perhaps, at Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone. So we also have placements in the sphere of philanthropy as well. So it's not just necessarily folks who are going the path of orchestral leadership, but also a number of academic placement, academic administration, but also now in foundations and beyond, opera companies, ballet companies. So it's really exciting to see, honestly, the diversity of talent, no pun intended, and so many different and interesting and varied career paths that are being followed. And I think the other shift that I've noticed in abundance is that certainly headhunters all across the country, as well as really colleagues across the country who themselves occupy leadership seats, reach out to us probably on a weekly basis with any openings.
So this is at the administrative level.
Absolutely.
Right. So in terms of the history of musical training, starting at a young age and all that, among Latinx and Black students, I would imagine that recruiting among orchestras and opera companies is a little bit more difficult because the chain is a little shorter than it has been for white people, frankly. And I'm wondering about that. I'm thinking about the Carnegie Hall youth orchestras and how they spend a fair amount of time simply recruiting young students. And I wonder, is there a recruitment process in place for auditions or just audition training at this stage?
Great question, and it's both. I think actually your example is a great one. NYO2 and these youth ensembles that Carnegie Hall leads, they do a fabulous job. Right. Recruiting incredibly diverse, exciting talent. Many of the young artists that they engage come through the ranks of Sphinx. Sphinx runs 3 separate summer boot camps that develop young Black and Latinx musicians ages 11 through 17. While we serve about 100 each year, I easily could serve 400, honestly. In fact, there's not any scarcity of talent in that 10 to 17 age range amongst Black and Latinx musicians of all instrument backgrounds and all genre persuasions. So in fact, where the drop-off happens is once they enter into the undergraduate degree world in music schools and conservatories, and then it's the funnel in the wrong direction. We don't retain, empower, engage the talent as we get into advanced degrees. So then that tells us, I think it's good news in some ways because it tells us talent is not a problem. Interest and excitement is not a problem, because that's also been one of those myths where I don't know for how long I'd hear from colleagues that rigor and desire to study isn't there amongst Black and Latinx communities. Couldn't be farther from the truth. Really what's happening is college is expensive. It takes an intentional effort to recruit, retain, engage, empower, and really care for a young person, particularly if it's a young person that enters into a collective where they are a distinctive minority. It's an unfortunate word, but really that's what that is. And I think what it should take is that intentional effort to see how we tip the scale, to make sure we retain the talent. If we care for the pipeline to go in the other direction, for it to grow as we enter the professional ranks, we have to overcompensate on the recruitment and retention side.